Yu-Gi-Oh! Has changed a lot since the first season of the anime, with the game having grown steadily more complex and cards more powerful as time went on. But even with this persistent power creep, Yami Yugi has remained as loyal to his cards as they have to him, no matter the era or timeline. Whether he's facing gods in Battle City, forging bonds beyond time, or exploring the dark side of dimensions, he's always treated his cards more like loyal companions instead of just creatures, and has inspired thousands of real-life duelists to do the same. So in this video, we're going to go over the 10 most important cards in Yugi's decks, how they were used in the anime or manga, and whether or not these cards have had any kind of impact on the real-life Yu-Gi-Oh! Metagame. And swarming in at number 10, we have Kuriboh, Yugi's favorite furball that managed to prove their worth despite how often they were mocked for being the weakest monster in the game by the likes of Pegasus, Kaiba, and even My Valentine. And looking at Kuriboh, you'd probably agree with him because it has a terrible stat line of only 300 attack and 200 defense, which made it pitifully weak even against the Duelist Kingdom era, where just about every other monster in the game dwarfed it. But Kuriboh was always more than just its stats, since it also has an effect in both the anime and the card game, which allows you to discard it from your hand during the damage calculation of a battle where your opponent's monster declared an attack, to make it so that you don't take any damage from that battle. This effect was used a bunch in the anime in order to save Yugi's life points in dire situations, which gave the Pharaoh an extra turn to try and fight back. This was an integral part in the Battle City semifinals against Kaiba in order to protect Yami from Obelisk's onslaught, and was ultimately one of the deciding factors that allowed for Yugi to win that duel and go on to face Merrick. But that's not the only way Kuriboh defended Yugi's life points, because it actually had a few hidden abilities and potential that only Yugi could see, and was specifically strong when paired with Multiply, a card which was capable of swarming an infinite number of Kuribohs to create an impenetrable wall that no monster could break. This was especially effective when paired with Kuriboh's ability to detonate on contact with an opponent's monster, to either weaken them or destroy them outright, which ended up being pretty much the entire reason that Yami was able to deal with the Pegasus Thousand Eyes Restrict to save his grandpa. Essentially, Kuriboh was supposed to represent the idea that even though a card might appear weak at first, a smart duelist that cares about their cards is going to find a way to use it to its full potential, an idea that's still incredibly important to Yu-Gi-Oh! To this day, which is why probably every protagonist to date has had their own Kuriboh variant in either the anime or the manga, to show off how weak cards can have a huge impact. Although, despite how iconic Kuriboh is for representing this ideal, the card never really made too much of a splash in the TCG, with Kuriboh itself only having seen competitive play in old Chaos strategies as a dark monster that could easily find its way to the graveyard for you to later banish for something like a Chaos Sorcerer. But other than in Chaos, Kuriboh itself has never seen any competitive play. Multiply might generate you a ton of tokens, but it's an unreliable 2-card combo, and there are other cards which can do a way better job of protecting your life points. Though most play it saw was probably in Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links, as stopping the damage from one attack from the hand was actually a pretty good effect in certain stall decks. With only 3 monster zones and before stronger X-Deck monsters came out, sometimes you only needed to stop 1 attack per turn in order to make it to your next turn. And with the plethora of back or removal options that people had in their decks, cards that could stop attacks from the hand did have some value. However, a ton of different Kuriboh variants, counterparts, and evolutions keep popping up within the TCG metagame, whether it's Sangan in older formats, Kuribanded in Burning Abyss, or Link Kuriboh during Spiral's Tier 0 reign. Kuriboh has always managed to keep reappearing in some way, shape, or form to guide and assist new generations of duelists just like how it aided Yugi. At times, even Yugi doubted Kuriboh, but no matter how often it was mocked or made fun of, he was an incredibly important part of Yugi's deck, and one that was responsible for winning him tons of duels, as a monster, as a deckmaster, and even as a friend. And while in the TCG it lacks the versatility that it had in the anime, Kuriboh and his variants still managed to find a way into the decks of duelists everywhere to show that even the weakest monsters have their strengths. Lighting the way to number 9 is Swords of Revealing Light, the first spell card that Yugi ever activated in the anime, and one that saved him from defeat a ton of different times on different occasions. Because what this card does is lock your opponent's monsters under its light and prevents them from being able to attack, but only for 3 turns, because during the end phase of your opponent's 3rd turn after you activate it, the swords destroy themselves. This is the most iconic effect of Swords, but it also comes with a lesser known effect when you activate it, which causes all set monsters your opponent controls to be flipped face up, revealing your opponent's hidden tricks. This second effect proved incredibly useful in Yugi's duel against Panic, who hid his monsters in the darkness of the duel field where Swords of Revealing Light managed to clear away the darkness. But of course, Swords of Revealing Light is best known as Yugi's main stall tool, and one that he'd activate in the face of impossible odds after opponent had brought out their boss monster, in order to give himself 3 more turns to try and turn the duel around, trusting that the heart of the cards will eventually draw him to what he needs to defeat whatever insurmountable odds his opponent has set up. And the most famous example of this is when Yugi activated swords in the first duel of the anime, locking Kaiba's 2 Blue Eyes White Dragons from being able to attack as he scraped through his deck for a way to win the duel, stalling out until he realized the power of his grandpa's cards, and eventually drawing into the 5 pieces of the unstoppable Exodia. In the actual game, Swords Revealing Light isn't as effective of a staple as the anime would have you believe, since there are a ton of different ways to remove it from the field, and even if it resolves, it doesn't stop your opponent from actually building their board in the first place. Which is why it's so surprising that there have actually been a couple of times where Swords has been competitively viable, for the exact same reasons that Yugi would use it in the anime, to stop your opponent's boss monster from ending the game while also guaranteeing that you remain alive for a few more turns so that you can draw into your outs. This was important when Gladiator Beast was seeing competitive success, since it was a way to stop the Gladiator Beasts from being able to battle and declare their effects. But even in the modern competitive games, Swords Revealing Light still sees play in runic stun strategies to floodgate the opponent out of ending the game by battle while accumulating a ton of free advantage from fountain draws. In the anime, Swords Revealing Light was a safety net that Yugi could cast in just about every situation that gave him enough turns to make a comeback. And while this effect is a lot more niche in the TCG, decks that can play Swords genuinely appreciate its ability to stall the game so they can draw into their deck's versions of Exodia, which shows that even the most competitive decks out there still need to believe in the heart of the cards. And charging into number 8 is Gaia the Fierce Knight, a warrior monster that came in clutch for Yugi several times due to the number of different forms he could take. By himself, Gaia is just a vanilla monster that requires 2 tributes. And while its attack stat is decently high, it pales in comparison to a ton of other 2-tribute vanilla monsters. But for what Gaia lacked in offensive power, he makes up for in his adaptability. You see, in the anime and manga, while Gaia was a powerhouse, he grew even stronger if you managed to evolve him into a new form in the middle of the duel. The most common way Yugi did this was by fusing Gaia with Curse of Dragon to form Gaia the Dragon Champion, a vanilla fusion monster that had an impressive 2600 attack stat that was capable of packing a punch, and appeared as the focus as one of the most iconic moments in the Duelist Kingdom arc, where Yugi launched the Dragon Champion with Catapult Turtle into Panic's Castle of Dark Illusions to crush his monsters after the Sword of Revealing Light had dissipated. But the Dragon Champion wasn't the only form that Gaia took, because the other evolved form of Gaia occurs after the Black Luster ritual occurs so that he becomes the Black Luster Soldier, one of Yugi's most powerful cards with an attack and strength that matches the Blue Eyes White Dragon. Now, just like in the anime, Gaia by himself has never seen a sustained amount of competitive success. But there are actually quite a few cards that are either linked to or evolved from Gaia that have had a metagame impact, with the best by far being Black Luster Soldier Envoy of the Beginning. Envoy of the Beginning was an insane boss monster for any strategy playing Chaos Attributed monsters, since it can act as removal for your opponent's monsters by banishing them, or could just OTK an opponent outright with its double attack. And thankfully for this BLS, you didn't need to perform a ritual summon, nor did you need the original Gaia to bring it out, as all of the power of the BLS came at a small cost of banishing a light and dark monster from your graveyard to summon him. In both the anime and the game itself, Gaia is definitely not the strongest card on this list, but was one of the first monsters in the game that showed us the strength of using one monster as material for another, whether that's for a fusion, synchro, Xyz, a link, or a ritual monster. And without Gaia, there is no Dragon Champion, and there's no BLS, which definitely makes him one of the most important pieces of the puzzle that is Yugi's deck. And thundering into number 7 is the Summoned Skull, a key member of the Arcfiend archetype that actually holds the title of Yugi's first ace monster. Summoned Skull is another vanilla beatstick much like Gaia, but is specifically notable in the TCG for being a level 6 monster, which made it an impressive boss monster in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh! And in Playground formats since it had an attack set that matched the Dark Magician, but required one less hold tribute. The anime version of Summoned Skull was an important part of Yugi's arsenal for this reason, since it was a high attack beater that was capable of dealing with a ton of different threats based purely on its attack power alone, all the way from Duelist Kingdom up until Yugi and Yami's final duel against one another. But it was actually within the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga where Summoned Skull shined the most, as Yugi's original ace monster. That, according to Kaiba, was one of the top 5 strongest monsters in the entire game, a fact that this manga showed off well with Summoned Skull beating down each and every one of Kaiba's monsters, and forced Kaiba to cheat to bring out Sugoroku Moto's stolen Blue Eyes White Dragon. But this duel didn't just show off the power of the original ace Arcfiend, it also showed an ideal that was incredibly important to the events of Season 0 Yugi, and one that stuck with duelists to this day. respecting and having loyalty to your cards so they, in turn, will be loyal to you. Summon Skull appeared to Yugi after several turns of Kaiba's Battle Axe destroying Yugi's monsters. It rewarded Yugi for his faith in his deck by letting him stage a comeback. This in contrast to Kaiba's summon of the Blue Eyes White Dragon, a card which didn't belong to him that he cheated to his hand. And as a result, when Kaiba declared an attack with Blue Eyes, the card simply refused to attack, and ended up destroying itself since it wasn't loyal to Kaiba and had Sogoroku's heart. Now, in the TCG, while Summon Skull boasts an impressive attack stat for its level, that's the only reason it's ever seen any success. And once the game moved past that point for big beatsticks, Summon Skull never really amounted to anything other than being a staple of playground formats. But the ideals with Summon Skull are still very much around in the TCG to this day. So many people will choose to play a deck or a strategy not because of how good it is, but because they're loyal to certain decks or even just cards they consider as their ace monsters, leading some people to discover the hidden strength held behind weird or janky boss monsters that nobody else has been able to see. As a whole, Summon Skull is well past its glory days, and unless it gets a ton of good support, it's unlikely that it'll ever see play again. But there's no doubt about Summon Skull's importance, both to Yugi and the game itself, setting the standard and foundations for what an ace monster should be: cool, interesting, and powerful. And reflecting into number 6 is Mirror Force, one of Yugi's strongest trap cards that was capable of turning an entire duel in his favor with a simple but game-winning effect in both the anime and TCG. And that effect is that whenever an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can activate Mirror Force to destroy all attack position monsters your opponent controls. This was an absolute boon in the anime, because no matter how dire the situation, Mirror Force was able to always act as the apex equalizer, as a card that was capable of redirecting the attack of even the most powerful boss monster right back at them. This made it the perfect trap card, and one that Yugi used to great effect by mind-gaming his opponent and making them think there was no way for them to lose, caused them to cockily declare an attack only for them to fall directly into Yugi's trap, wiping their field in the process and allowing for Yugi to stage a comeback. And this almighty power was a really important part in Yami and Kaiba's duel against Darts in the culmination of the Waking the Dragon arc, where its power was absorbed by the Fang of Critias to form Mirror Force Dragon, who uses effect to destroy every monster Darts controls, thereby freeing the trap souls contained within the Mirror Knight tokens. But that's not the only place where Mirror Force came in clutch in this duel, as its power was also absorbed by the legendary Knight Critias to defeat the Orichalcos monsters after Darts had grown scarily close to winning the duel, giving Yami yet another fighting chance. Meanwhile, in the actual game itself, Mirror Force is actually a really important part of the history of the TCG for similar reasons to why Yugi used it in the anime, because in the first 15 or so years of Yu-Gi-Oh's lifespan, its effect had the potential to be a devastating blow if it was capable of wiping an entire field, giving you a fighting chance of winning the duel even after your opponent had managed to build up an impossible board. In fact, Mirror Force was so infamous and so powerful that not only did it spend some time on the Forbidden Limited list, it also changed the way people played the game, because every card your opponent set had the potential to be Mirror Force, so if you wanted to play around it, you turned some of your monsters to defense position before attacking, even if you were guaranteed game if you attacked with all of your monsters instead, simply because you had to fear and respect Mirror Force. And this respect for Mirror Force isn't just something that was done in the ancient past, as it even managed to see a ton of competitive play in Zodiac lists during its Tier 0 reign. Unfortunately though, in the modern era the past 5 years or so, battle traps as a whole have seen a sharp decline in use simply because it's now a lot easier for your opponent to prepare for the threat of something like Mirror Force, even if accidentally, because it's very likely your opponent is just going to be able to remove it from the field before the battle phase, set up some kind of negate, or just summon a towers-like monster that Mirror Force and its variants can't beat. And that's honestly a shame, because there's no doubt that in both the TCG and the anime itself, Mirror Force is a really iconic and important part of Yu-Gi-Oh's history, and one that's managed to turn duels around, winning games for both Yugi and real-life duelists. There are definitely still a ton of good equalizers around that fulfill the role of Mirror Force and allow you to deal with your opponent's oppressive fields, but none of them really encapsulate the fear and suspense that Mirror Force could generate. Obliterating the number 5 spot are the Exodia pieces, the ace monster of Solomon Moto's deck that, for a while, was the ultimate boss monster of the anime, and one that was deemed so unstoppable by the likes of Weevil Underwood that the only way he could think of beating it was by throwing it overboard before the Duelist Kingdom arc. And the reason why Exodia was deemed so overpowered in the anime was because once you managed to collect each of the 5 pieces, it obliterated every one of your opponent's monsters and won the duel instantly, and there was no way to deal with it, or stop the oncoming attack once it had begun. A fact that Seto Kaiba learned the hard way in the anime. You see, in the first episode, Yugi was on the verge of defeat after Kaiba had managed to bring out 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons, which he believed to be the strongest monsters in the game, that only had been held back thus far by the Swords of Revealing Light. This gave Yugi a crisis of faith and made him unsure if he was even capable of defeating Kaiba even with the heart of the cards, to the point where he began to struggle to draw the final card from the top of its deck. But due to the reassurance of his grandfather's spirit and a reminder that his friends were always with him due to the friendship mark Taya had drawn, Yugi's faith in his cards was bolstered, which gave him the confidence to draw the final piece of Exodia, the only card capable of winning the duel and one that hadn't even been summoned before, as no one else, other than Yugi, had ever managed to assemble all 5 pieces of the puzzle. This made for one of the most, if not the most iconic moment in the anime, and exists in the hearts and minds of thousands of duelists to this day as a reminder that no matter how dire a situation is, believing in the heart of the cards can sometimes be enough to win a duel. Unfortunately though, this was actually the only moment in the Duel Monsters anime where Yugi uses Exodia in a game, as thanks to a certain insect duelist, most of Yugi's Exodia pieces were lost. The cards did reappear every so often though, either as Solomon Moto's Ka, or even in the hands of other duelists, such as the Rare Hunter in Battle City who used Exodia much differently to Yugi. Because while Yugi used Exodia as the ultimate trump card in his duel versus Kaiba, the Rare Hunter centered his entire deck around the Exodia pieces, with most of his cards either being designed to thin his deck, or stall out your opponent so that he could eventually draw the 5 pieces. Which, funnily enough, is usually how Exodia decks are used in the TCG, because the Exodia pieces themselves are actually kinda bricky, since until you have all 5 pieces, they don't really do anything. Which means playing Exodia as a plan B like Yugi did usually makes your deck worse, since you're filling it with a bunch of dead cards that are likely to never come up. But if you play your deck with a bunch of draw cards, as well as ways to restrict your opponent's actions like the Rare Hunter, you'll have a pretty effective Exodia strategy that can end up obliterating unprepared opponents by turboing the pieces to your hand. And it's this style of Exodia deck that managed to succeed in the 2012 Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship, a championship that featured some of the best duels from around the world at the time, where Exodia managed to reach top 8 amidst a meta of Insector, Wind-Up, and Dino Rabbit. As a whole though, Exodia definitely isn't the ultimate strategy as the anime portrayed it, with it only really being a gimmick deck in the modern era. But to a lot of people, that doesn't matter. And no matter how bad the deck might be, they're willing to play it just so they can resolve Exodia and feel like Yugi did in that first duel, solving the puzzle that is the invincible Exodia. Resurrecting to number 4 is Reborn the Monster, otherwise known as Monster Reborn. In the anime and the TCG, Reborn works exactly the same. It allows you to target one monster in either player's graveyard and special summon it to your field. This made it yet another important tool in Yugi's arsenal, and one that he'd consistently use in the anime and manga in order to return monsters from the graveyard back to the field, and was even an important part in his first duel in the manga against Kaiba, where he used Monster Reborn to revive Sogoroku's Blue Eyes to attack Kaiba for game. But the most important use of Reborn was actually in the final duel between Yugi and Atem. In this final duel, Atem activates Monster Reborn in order to special summon out Slifer the Sky Dragon from the graveyard and attack Yugi's Silent Magician level 5, which would have won him the duel. If Yugi had activated Gold Sarcophagus earlier, a card that, in the anime, actually negates the effects of that card after your opponent activates it, which meant that Atem's Slifer the Sky Dragon was sent to the graveyard. According to Ishizu Ishtar, this negation wasn't just a tactical move by Yugi, it was also a message to the Pharaoh to say that the dead don't belong in the world of the living, and the fact that Reborn was negated allowed for Yugi to win the duel, showing Atem his strength and giving him peace as he moved on to the spirit world. Thankfully, games in the TCG have a lot lower stakes, so if your Reborn happens to be negated, it doesn't mean that you have to be sent to the spirit world or Shadow Realm. It just means you might lose the game. Although, if your Reborn manages to resolve, that can result in a huge advantage, because just like in the anime, being able to return to monsters to the field is incredibly strong, and gives you a wide array of potential options when looking at both graveyards. Reviving is just a really strong effect, and Reborn was the first card in the game that allowed for that level of recursion. So much so that pretty much any card that revives a monster from the graveyard is usually referred to as a Reborn. And no matter the era, this effect is absurd, whether you're using Reborn in older formats to steal an opponent's big beater, or using the archetypal Reborns of the modern day to extend your combo. Reborn and Reborn-like effects are always going to be good, which is likely why, even to this day, Monster Reborn is still limited to 1 copy. As a whole, Monster Reborn is one of the most iconic cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! In both the anime and TCG, as the card's capable of allowing your coolest monsters to return to the field in some way, shape, or form. And although Yugi's final message to Atem was poignant, bringing monsters back to the world of living is one of the coolest effects in the game, and has allowed for a ton of different and fun strategies to see play over the years. Thundering in with force at number 3 is Slifer the Sky Dragon, Yami Yugi's signature Egyptian god card. Now, in the TCG, Slifer has a ton of different effects in order to match its anime counterpart, because just like in the anime, Slifer requires 3 tributes of normal summon, its normal summon can't be negated, and cards and effects can't be activated after it's normal summoned. It gains 1000 attack for every card in your hand. It even has Slifer's second mouth attack, which reduces the attack of any monster that's normal or special summoned to your opponent's field and attack position by 2000. and if that monster's attack is reduced to 0, you can destroy that card. But Slifer also comes with the downside that during the end phase, if it was special summoned, you must send it to the graveyard. But this is actually a nerfed version of Slifer, because in the anime, the Egyptian god cards all shared extra effects that made them extremely powerful, with all the Egyptian gods being immune to the effects of non-god cards, alongside a bunch of other busted protection effects that made them almost impossible to deal with, unless you also had an Egyptian god yourself. And as a result, Yugi pretty much made Slifer the main boss monster of his deck for Battle City, but only used it when it was necessary, as otherwise it would be too dangerous and could potentially put innocent people at risk. But he didn't hold back during the Battle City finals, where he used Slifer to take on the other Egyptian god cards, facing off against Kaiba's Almighty Obelisk, Merrick's Winged Dragon of Ra, the two other god cards that, in the anime, were pretty much unstoppable. Unfortunately though, in the actual game, Slifer hasn't really lived up to its status as the ultimate boss monster, and has only ever seen fringe amounts of play due to its second mouth effect, which can technically act as a floodgate against decks that focus on low attack monsters as combo enablers. But even though Slifer never really saw any play itself, what it represented is still an important part of Yu-Gi-Oh! The boss monster. A monster that feels satisfying to bring to the field that makes you feel secure in your chances of winning. And to a lot of people, these boss monsters are an important part of the deck that makes them and their strategy feel special. It doesn't matter if your boss monster is as bad as the original Gate Guardian, or as used as Baron de Fleur or Axis Kotaker, summoning these monsters just makes you feel cool, in a similar way to summoning out your ace card. Ever since he won in Battle City, Slifer has always been one of Yugi's coolest monsters, and was the one that was vital to take on both Kaiba and Merrick during the Battle City finals. And although it never saw play itself, the excitement it brought by being on screen inspired a ton of duelists to believe in the power of their own boss monsters, even if they were a lot weaker than anime Slifer. And appearing from behind the curtain at number 2 is Dark Magician Girl, the ever faithful student of the Dark Magician, who also happens to be Mana's Ka, the student of Mahad who vowed to grow stronger after her teacher's death. And this is reflected in Dark Magician Girl's effect, because she gains 300 attack and defense for every Dark Magician or Magician of Black Chaos in either player's graveyard. In the anime, this made Dark Magician Girl an excellent part of Yugi's arsenal, as a backup ace monster that has the potential to be even stronger than the Dark Magician himself. A fact that was specifically highlighted with her first appearance, as she gained an attack buff from both the Dark Magicians in Yugi's graveyard and the one in Arcana's to defeat his on-field Dark Magician. But the Dark Magician Girl represents more than just strength for the Pharaoh, because as a card and as a character, Dark Magician Girl represents Atem's humanity and his promise to destroy the Orichalcos, which is part of why it was such a shock when Atem activated the Seal of Orichalcos, binding Dark Magician Girl, the Dragon Knight, to the Seal's powers, as he essentially gave in to the corruption of the Orichalcos in an attempt to win a duel, which caused Timaeus to abandon the Pharaoh for a while. This made it seem like the Pharaoh had given up his soul completely, as he was even willing to sacrifice Dark Magician Girl and the promise he made to her. But after proving himself worthy of Timaeus once more, Dark Magician Girl and her Dragon Knight form became a staple of Yugi's strategy and was even an integral part of Dart's defeat. You see, in the duel against Darts, after each of the Orichalcos monsters had been destroyed, Darts had brought out Divine Serpent Get and declared an attack on the legendary Knight Timaeus, destroying it by battle and reducing Yugi's life points to 0. But despite that, the duel wasn't over, because Yami activated Relay Soul to special summon Dark Magician Girl from his hand. And due to the effect of the anime version of Relay Soul, so as long as she remained face up on the field, Yugi couldn't lose the duel. But the catch was, if she left the duel, then he would lose the duel instantly. This made for a really intense moment in the anime, where in order to win the duel, Yugi had to literally hold on to his humanity, putting all of his faith into Dark Magician Girl while resisting the pull of the Orichalcos. A play that he was rewarded for, because after redirecting the second attack of Ge to his legendary knights, Yami formed an infinite loop and combined Timaeus with his other knights, which gave him an infinite attack as well, allowing to crash with Ge, winning Yugi the duel on the spot. Unfortunately though, Dark Magician Girl has never played too much of a pivotal role in the TCG. Her effect isn't really that useful out of Dark Magician decks, and Dark Magician strategies have never really been that competitively viable. But even in spite of that, Dark Magician Girl has become an icon of the Yu-Gi-Oh community, as a monster that's instantly recognizable by both fans of the anime and competitive players alike, and is a really important part of Yu-Gi-Oh's cultural impact as one of these faces of the game. And while Dark Magician Girl has never been competitively viable, there's no doubt about the important role she's played in both the anime and real world as a pillar of Yu-Gi-Oh's identity. But every student needs a teacher, which brings us to the number 1 spot. And at number 1 is his ever loyal companion, the Dark Magician, the Ka Mahad in Yami Yugi's ace monster. Dark Magician is a 2500 attack beatstick that has no effect, with it instead being a normal monster that, according to its flavor text, is the ultimate wizard in terms of attack and defense. And it was this power that allowed for the Dark Magician to contend with and face off against some of the most powerful monsters in the anime, from Relinquish to the Guardians, and of course against Sento Kaiba's Blue Eyes White Dragons. In a sense, Yugi treats a Dark Magician more like a friend than an actual card, which makes sense given the spirit of the card belongs to Mahad, a childhood friend of Atem that chose to live on as an eternal servant by sacrificing himself in order to become the Dark Magician. And Yugi is rewarded for that trust because no matter the duel or the opponents he's faced, Yugi could rely upon this card with his entire being to either get him out of rough situations or deliver a final blow. And true to his name, Dark Magician was more than just his stat lines, because he also had a series of magic tricks that made for some of the most intense and interesting duels in the anime. Magical hats saved Yugi in a ton of different situations, allowing for Dark Magician and his other monsters to hide beneath the hats to potentially dodge an opponent's monster's attack. There was also Magic Cylinder, a card capable of sending an opponent's attack right back at them. And Mystic Box, a card that plays both Dark Magician and an opponent's monster within the two boxes. The Dark Magician's box would be pierced by swords, only for it to be revealed that he's magically switched boxes with an opponent's monster, leaving them to be destroyed by the swords instead. But of course, the magic that Dark Magician was best known was his Dark Magic attack. And that's not even where Dark Magician's utility ends, because just like Gaia, Dark Magician could evolve and either combine his power with other monsters or evolve. From the likes of Dark Sage to Amulet Dragon and of course the Dark Paladin. And this willingness to evolve or lend his strength to others is precisely why Dark Magician has managed to see play in the TCG. You see, as a strategy, Dark Magician has never been a key contender in the metagame, because while the deck has some decent interaction, it's usually not enough to take on the strongest decks of the meta. But because of the power of the Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, a fusion monster that specifically requires the Dark Magician as one of its materials, the card has seen a spike in competitive play in recent years, because the representation of Joe and Yugi's bond is strong, really strong, since it's a monster with a high attack stat that can't be destroyed or targeted by card effects, can pop your opponent's monsters while burning for a ton of damage, and even has an Omni Negate. And as a result, a ton of different strategies throughout the years have willingly chose to play Dark Magician in their decks so they can access it in some way. Some decks did this by using Red Eyes Fusion by either activating it from the hand or copying its effect with Verte Anaconda. This made for a really strong plan B in case your main line of play was interrupted, while also being an extra piece of difficult to deal with interaction that you could just easily add to your end board. However, after Verte was banned in the TCG, Dragoon and Dark Magician saw a lot less play, since there weren't that many decks that could really take advantage of Red Eyes Fusion due to its harsh restriction. But it didn't stop seeing play entirely, because there's actually a deck that can play Dragoon without the need for Red Eyes Fusion, Branded. A deck that can choose to play Dark Magician to send with the effect of Branded Fusion in order to get access to the insanely powerful boss monster. Overall, no matter whether you're a fan of the anime or the TCG, Dark Magician is without a doubt one of the most important and iconic monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! And his loyalty to Atem shows just how strong the connections between cards and duelists can be. He was an important feature in just about every one of Yugi's duels as his ace monster. But more than that, he was a friend to Atem, and one that refused to leave his side even in death. And although he's only ever been played in the TCG to facilitate Dragoon, it's a nice thought that the spirit of Mahad is helping duelists in the competitive game just as he did in the anime, and gives even the most competitive duelists a chance to feel like Yugi Moto themselves. Alright, and that's the list. It was honestly hard to bring Yugi's important cards to just 10 entries, to the point where a part 2 could be definitely made. So if you'd like more anime-focused lists like this one, please let us know down in the comments below, and tell us what you'd like to see. Whether it's the important cards of other characters like Seto Kaiba or Joey Wheeler, the anime's best moments, or even the differences between anime and TCG cards. And remember to like the video, subscribe if you want to keep up to date with any future lists, and thanks for watching.